all kinds of information for you, Brian, with the Sync 3 and the 2020 Ford F-150. Guess how much information they have for you for the Sync 4 2021 F-150? I want to go ahead and tell you, absolutely none.
No way.
You're like, you've got to be kidding me. Hello, welcome to Brake Check. I'm Craig.
And I'm Brian.
And this is episode 4 of the Brake Check Show podcast. And just like last few times we've done this, we've got 3 topics for us. What we've been driving lately. We've got an update to episode 2 where we write on the Raptor R predictions.
Ooh.
And we've also got, we just got a straight up old man rant for us there at the end. So with that, Brian, let's dig into what we've been driving lately. And why don't you start us off with the whichever one you want to pick, the Elantra or the F-150, and go for it.
Okay, so we have had the Elantra and F-150 in the same week. These are out of the press fleets. And the Elantra is interesting because, as you pointed out, it is the North American Car of the Year. And ironically, the North American Truck of the Year happens to be the 21 Ford F-150. So we
right.
And they were both blue. And the week prior to, we had 2 white cars that we swapped for 2 blue cars. So we've got some consistency happening and trending in our driveways for sure.
It was the North American award-winning week. The only thing we were missing was the Mustang Mach-E, which is the SUV of the year.
Which we're being told is on the way as well. We'll have that at some point this spring. So,
right.
Looking forward to that. Let's start with the Elantra. I think that one is an interesting little car. And it's something I look at, and my immediate takeaway is someone cares about the design of this thing. And right out of the gate, whether you like it or not, you cannot argue that someone took the time to design it and make it bespoke and interesting. In our review, we'll talk about the Zorro stripe on the side. And I don't know about you, Craig, but the more I looked at that thing, and I'm not going to say it's beautiful per se, because that is such a subjective term that we can argue about till the sun goes down. But I generally like very conservative cars over my lifetime of vehicles. And I looked at this one and thought there's nothing conservative about this, and it does not bother me on day 2. On day 1, I was a little bit offended by it just even sitting there. But by day 2, I came around and I started to really appreciate all the effort put into it and how interesting it was.
Right. No, very good points. And I would agree. You definitely, I'd say we both like conservative styling, generally speaking, on cars. We like clean lines. We don't like anything obtuse or outrageous. Doesn't mean we don't like a car with some styling. And this car definitely has it. You're right. At first, you're like, ooh, I don't know about that. Look at that. There's a Zorro mark on the side. Like, what's going on there? And we talked about that in the review, which will be coming out soon. But you're right. It absolutely does grow on you in good ways. As like each time I walked up to the car, I kind of noticed myself looking for something different in the styling elements on the exterior.
Well, and the fun part is I did the same thing, and I usually found something every time I walked up on it.
Right. And it's funny. So I asked some people when I was going to work, and I was like, hey, man, what do you think? And asked some coworkers, and they were looking at it, and I thought I was going to get a really negative reaction because it's a potentially polarizing styled car. And I'd never got ooh, that's ugly. I got, wow, that's interesting. Huh. And so I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think it speaks to, it's a very thought out style, not thoughtfully styled. I don't want to say that. It's a intentionally styled car that makes you think.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And what I'm getting at is there was probably hundreds of renditions before they landed on that, before they locked it in.
Right.
And you can tell they didn't just, not drag on Volkswagen, but my 2017 Jetta that I had, that was just a car. And they just said, it needs to be this size, needs to have 4 doors. What the car you drew when you were 4 years old, that's what it was.
Yeah, just a car.
It's a car. But it was conservative, and I like that. It never looked silly, and it went under the radar quite well. And the Elantra is the opposite of that, right? But again, I appreciate the effort put in. And some of the things that bothered me on the internet, looking at it in the release photos and the press kits, did not bother me at all in person, and they all started to make sense.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point. And we talk about this a lot with a lot of cars. This is one of those cars that when you look at pictures of it online or on Hyundai's website, when you're thinking about, when you're researching it, it does not look the same as it does in person.
No,
It
not
just doesn't. There's a lot of angles and features in the styling of the car that do not get picked up on camera. And so, if you are thinking about this car, do yourself a favor and go check it out in person. You may not like it. I think you will, but it's going to look better in person than it does in pictures.
Yeah, that's completely true. And I'm already going to predict it right now. Get ready for the peanut gallery. They're going to comment just like the YouTube review of the Sonata we did, which we felt very similar to this. It's less extreme, I think, because that car is obviously aimed at a different demographic or age group. But the Sonata, I look at it in person, and it doesn't bother me anymore. But when it first came out, I was like, what the heck is going on? And I don't know. There's some people at Hyundai that really know what they're doing, and I appreciate it. So,
I appreciate the effort. At least they're trying something, whether you agree with it or not. They're trying something.
Completely. There's no box about that car.
Right.
And so it is interesting to look at. Beyond that, how do you think it drove? Let's touch on that briefly before we go into the Ford. What did you think about its just livability and what it's supposed to be?
Well, and so I had high expectations because it was the North American Car of the Year, which that's a big award. I mean, look, there's a lot of awards in the automotive world. To me, those are like the biggest. The North American Car of the Year and Truck of the Year. And so there were some high expectations. Well, before I get into the driving, though, the only exterior styling thing I'll say about the Sonata and the Elantra that is the most controversial, or the hardest thing it took a long time for this to grow on me, is the grill.
Oh, yeah.
The grill,
that's a good point.
They both kind of have this catfishy, facey mouth thing, and it's a little weird, and I don't know if I like that. But anyways,
okay. I can't let that go. I'm glad you brought that up, because when the Elantra showed up at the house, the first thing I thought was, that's an ugly face. And on the internet, the rear 3/4 angle was something weird is happening here, but in person, it wasn't weird at all. And then the grill all of a sudden bothered me. So these things that I thought I had figured out doing research on the front end was kind of all wrong. I kind of got it all wrong. And then, like you said, there's a lot of surface changes on the car. And so the depth of it is not perceived through a flat photo on your computer or your phone. It just doesn't pick it up. And so, in fact, it was hard to shoot it. When I was doing B-roll in the car, I got multiple positions of the same angle, and I can tell you right now, half of them aren't going to pull it out or aren't going to work.
It's because there's too much going on, and that's why you can't photograph it.
It's a challenge.
Which is why, again, you have to see it in person. Okay, so on to how it drove. Again, high expectations. Here's what I'll say.
Before we get to that, I want to explain the powertrain real quick. This is a CVT. Just going to put that out there before you speak, because I think it's going to affect some of the things you're going to say. So,
you're right. 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-popper CVT with a chain-driven CVT, not a belt-driven. So, but anyway, so high expectations. It was, it did what it was supposed to do. That's what I'll say. Very comfortable. It's just a car, which is refreshing. With all these crossovers we've talked about in other podcasts, I get confused with what cars are trying to be. It's nice to get in a vehicle that knows what it's supposed to be. It's a car. It sits low to the ground. It handles well because it does sit low to the ground. It gets good mileage because it sits low to the ground. There's not all these compromises going on because it's what it's supposed to be. It's just a car. And it got great gas mileage. I got 36 without trying, and when I tried really hard, I got 43. So, and I think it's rated 3141. I can't remember.
Yeah,
something like
that's pretty good. I mean, you're cracking the EPA rating.
And so it did everything ergonomically. Hyundai and Kia have it going on. I think our biggest gripe, which we talked about in the review, was the screen. The infotainment screen is really far away, but it's only a problem when you actually needed to touch something on it. When you're actually listening to whatever podcast or music or whatever you're listening to, and you didn't need to touch it a whole bunch of times, it was fine and was kind of nice actually being farther away because it was more in your line of sight. So in ways it kind of helped, but that was probably my biggest gripe. And didn't have time to talk about this in the review, but the seats, this didn't bother you as much. So I'm curious, some of the things you have that, but the seats were really, they were hot. you'd sit in for a few minutes and you heat it up quick. And I'm not talking about the heated seats because it had heated seats. I'm just talking about the heater off. You don't want it to be hot. It is a hot material. And I would be really concerned about driving that car in the climate here in Texas in the summer. So, that was kind of my take on it. What was your take?
Yeah, I think before you started out with it being a car, I think I called you the first morning I drove it in and called you and said, man, how refreshing is it to just drive a car? We own pickup trucks, we own cars as well, but we've had a lot of, over the last, year of reviewing cars, we've had a lot of trucks and crossovers. We've had some great sports cars too, don't get me wrong. We've had some all-stars. But recently we had the CX-9 and the Telluride back-to-back. And I can just tell you right now, as a one person driving to work by themselves, the crossover just doesn't make sense. And we've talked about that endlessly before. I'm not going to get into that. But it was so refreshing to get into just a car. It wasn't too tall. It wasn't hard to get in. It wasn't styled so funky that it was uncomfortable to egress and get in the car. It just worked. And then, like you said, the Hyundai ergonomics, completely agree. The screen was far away, but the steering wheel controls, when you're driving, it being far away wasn't a problem. It didn't matter. Because you're already using steering wheel controls at that point, and it was fine. And we've driven enough Hyundai Kia products recently that it was just, there was no learning curve. In fact, the steering wheel layout was identical to the Telluride, so I felt like I'd just been driving this thing. I do want to talk about handling, because we discussed this a lot about how, it's, crossovers handle worse because they're taller, which is usually true. This is one of those cars that in the real world, I struggled to make it understeer or oversteer. And what I mean by that is it never had enough power to actually push the front end. It never pushed out with understeer, which is weird to me because a lot of these cars that are at that price point or for potentially youth drivers, they just default a lot of understeer. Even the Germans do that. The Jettas do it. The Focuses do it. They all do it to a certain extent. I never found it as a glaring flaw. Sure, you could push it in the right spot and get there, but you couldn't just dummy understeer it. And that was really refreshing. And part of the trade-off is it wouldn't oversteer either, but part of that's because the wheelbase is so long in that car. It feels like a Honda Accord or a Fusion. It's so long because it's just a big car. But all that aside, my biggest complaints were road noise on like coarse Texas highways. The CVT I was actually really impressed with, which I never thought I would ever say that in my entire life. The chain drive the rubber bandy part was gone because it was chain driven. And would I still prefer a torque converted or a manual with a clutch? Yes, I prefer that. But if you have to go this route for whatever reason, it's not a complete penalty box. So wasn't terrible.
Absolutely. I can see why it won the award.
Sure.
Was it the most exciting, most special vehicle on the planet? No, but that's not what that award is about. I think that award is about rewarding manufacturers for doing things really well and not being afraid to think outside the box.
Completely.
And I think that's what they
rewarded.
I think that's what they got rewarded for with the styling, but executing something that's hard to do. A cheap, economical, compact car, doing that well. And we've talked about this before, and maybe this will be another future topic. Look, a Mercedes S-Class is amazing, but it's not as hard for a manufacturer to make a Mercedes S-Class because they can just pour all the resources they want into it because they can charge whatever they want for it.
Yeah, they can throw cash at it.
A Hyundai Elantra has to meet a certain price point, which means they can't just throw all the cash in the world at it. And so that's impressive. It's a pretty good feat that Hyundai pulled off, and they've done it well. So
yeah, that's a good point. This car we drove was $24,000, and it was well equipped. It had a lot of options. It was one under the top trim, and I can tell you right now, you can probably get that thing with rebates for $22,000. And that's it's a lot of car for $22,000, and I think I would recommend it to a lot of people.
Very good car for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Completely. Now, I still wouldn't pick it for me because I'm not a good case for that car. But if you need a commuter, man, it's up there. It's top 3, no question about it.
It gets way better mileage than my little commuter box, and it makes a lot more power. So there's that. Now, what we're really waiting for is the inline, and so that's coming soon, we hope.
Yes.
And we'll get to play with it soon, we hope. So we're definitely looking forward to that because that'll have a true manual. So
yeah, we are hoping to have that this spring as well. The there is a limitation on press vehicles right now with the COVID scenario and just general supply of cars.
Yes.
So we do have to be patient, but that is high on my list to drive. I'm wondering if it's just the Korean GLI or if it's going to teach us anything else.
It'll be interesting. Okay, so let's move on to we had another car this week or last week. It was a 2021 F-150, our second one we've had recently. This one we got to have a little longer, so we could get to know it a little bit better. And it was the 2021 F-150 Lariat FX4 Sport Package.
Yes.
Make sure I get it right with the 3.5-liter Eco Beast.
You said that right. That's correct.
Second Eco Beast for us recently. And, we had a little bit different experience than the first one. Started off not so hot, but then as the week went on, and we actually got to push it to its limits a little bit on what it was designed to do, maybe on some dirt roads and some off-roading, our tune changed a little bit. So why don't you talk us through that?
Yeah, so I want to back up to the first Lariat Eco Beast that we reviewed, and that was back in December. And we had acquired that from a local dealer, Mike Brown Ford in Granbury, Texas. And those guys are great. We work with them all the time. And the truck had just come out, and we wanted to drive it right away and see what it was all about. And Ford didn't even have them in their press fleets yet. So we went and grabbed that. We enjoyed it for the day, and we're really impressed with it. And then fast forward to the Ford supplied one that we had for a week of testing. And I immediately had I had to refresh myself and go, well, wait a minute, why do I feel differently about this now than when I did when we first drove it? And
right.
So I was really hot on the truck, and then it showed up, and then I cooled off quite a bit. And then midweek, I started getting over or adjusting to some things. Because I do have something in my mind of what an F-150 should be. Because we've had so many of them over the years, I have an expectation. And then we get in and I go, well, why is that different? And then I kind of had to realize that different doesn't mean bad. It's just new and different. So I had to adjust a little bit.
Yeah, you're really funny. At first, you're like, you're a roller coaster on this F-150. The one we had a while back, excited. Then you got this one, you're like, what is this? I don't know what's going on. And then as the week went on, you're like, I like this. So, sorry, continue.
Yeah. And we're going to discuss the majority of my gripes at the end of this episode with our old man rant that we're going to get into.
Okay.
It applies to both of these cars, by the way. But
absolutely.
So stay tuned for that. But midweek, I got a little more warmed up to it, and then we swapped cars. You took the truck, and I took the Elantra, and then we went to go shoot, and we have a great location nearby that has some dirt roads that are through some rangeland. And then all of a sudden, it became a F-150 FX4 WRX STI. And it became a riot. And then all of a sudden, all these little foibles that were bothering me, like for some reason, the driver's seat had like a lump in the vertical part in the back, which the first truck didn't have. And so I was really perplexed by that. Like the moment I sat in the truck, I went, what is wrong with the seat? And it felt like it had lumbar at your shoulder blade. It was really weird. And you had the same problem. Our spouses did not recognize that problem. So maybe we're just weird. I don't know. But once the truck was sideways, and on dirt, it feels like a Hellcat. It just wants to do rolling burnouts at whatever speed you're going, and it's happy to drift as much as you want. And so all of a sudden, I just went, "This is the best thing I've ever driven. What's the problem?" So, it's funny how things will change. So the bones are still really solid, and I kept thinking to myself, "Yeah, obviously the Raptor is based on this. It has some good bones. There's some bones in there that are solid. The chassis was good. The chassis flex was non-existent.
Right.
But really to get down to it, the foibles I had were that particular spec we had. It was just too expensive for what it was. Because it was
the Sigurd, what, 68?
68. After TTL, you're over 70 grand if you pay full MSRP. And there's some dealers out there that aren't throwing rebates at this at all.
That's true.
There's a scenario where someone goes and pays 70 grand for that truck, and it's just too much.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and my issue was, for that kind of money, that's King Ranch money, which is going to hold its value better.
That's Raptor money.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, in 21, there's not a Raptor, so we got to go off model years. But even then, you could find a 2020 on the lot for about that.
Right.
So it's a pill to swallow for sure. Ergonomically, and I don't think you recognize this or felt the same way, but the steering wheel felt wider. It felt more like a school bus compared to...
No, when you first told me that, I thought you were crazy, but then I drove it, and You're absolutely right. That is a massive steering wheel.
I don't know why either. I don't know. Maybe it was just an aesthetic, but I don't think functionally. I think it made it worse functionally. It just made it feel bigger. And
Now, again, our wives didn't. At least my wife did not. She didn't even notice that. She goes, "This seems normal to me. It doesn't seem big to me." But
yeah,
so I don't know. I will say that my theory is it's so big because that digital instrument cluster has to be seen.
oh yeah,
And so I think that's why they made it so big.
I think you're completely right. And the other thing too is some of the switches on the steering wheel. There's just so many of them. It was a little bit. I felt a bit like I needed a teenager to help me out a little bit on that. So that was part of the other problem. But beyond that, it was very spacious, just like they always are. It got way better gas mileage than I thought it was going to get, and you roller coastered on that for a minute too. When you first started, you said, "Why doesn't this get 40 miles a gallon or whatever?" So
I didn't say that.
Well, you referenced your truck, and your truck gets about 20, right?
Yep.
This truck is 4-wheel drive, and what did you hypermile out of that thing?
I think I got right at 19, 19 and a half, something like that.
Okay, and it has how much torque?
500 pound-feet of torque.
Okay, yeah. So,
and by the way, 500 pound-feet of torque all day long.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because it feels like, so in the tuner world, the tuner car world, there's something called boost by gear. And I want to explain that real quick. And what that means is I'm thinking of like a Super 2JZ or a aftermarket turbo Mustang. These guys will lower the boost level in first and second and third gear. And as you climb in gears and wheel speed is higher, it will up the boost a little bit every time you shift. I feel like this does that from the factory. And it's the most bizarre thing to feel in a factory supplied vehicle that's just off the lot. But whenever I'm boogieing it, I go, why isn't it? I don't feel the wind resistance on the front of the truck. Like, I don't feel it.
It feels like a video game hack. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And you just go, well, wait a minute. Like, I'm doing 75. It shouldn't feel as fast as 25 when I floor it. It's just, it's bizarre. It's completely bizarre.
Right. Yeah, and I credit a lot of that, I think, to the 10-speed.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I got back in my truck with the 6-speed, and I immediately was thinking, man, I need more of those gears so that just keeps me in the boost all the time. And so I definitely realized how much that was helping when I got back into the 6-speed. So definitely think that was a factor.
Which is good. And while you're talking 10-speed, just like the previous Lariat we drove in December, this is the best calibration from Ford I've experienced in that transmission. So hats off to the guys that programmed that thing. It made a big difference.
So like you, I had a little bit of a roller coaster with it too. I could not get comfortable in the thing at first. I had the weird back thing with the seat like you're talking about. Thousands, like you said, so many buttons, and they didn't seem logically laid out at first. These are all little unfair things to complain about, because if you owned the thing, you would immediately learn those.
Yeah, sure.
And I'll give Ford credit. I've actually talked to some previous owners of Fords, or they're still current owners too, but they've stayed in the Ford family, not switched. And one of the reasons I've asked them, why didn't you get a GM? Why didn't you get the Dodge? They said they liked all the buttons in the Ford because it made them feel like it had more features. So
there's some.
I don't know if there's something to that or strategy to that, but maybe Ford knows what they're doing there. But anyways, there's that.
Well, and here's the other thing. You and I complain about touchscreen operations all the time.
Yep.
And credit to Ford, the things that you want to access routinely, there's a hard button for it.
That's true. Okay, but here's what happened to me. My roller coaster, when I started enjoying it, started growing on me, was when I literally drove the thing for 5 hours one day. I had to go to work. I had to leave early. I had to go pick up the kids. I had to go to a funeral really far away. It was a long day with the family in the truck, and we had to drive all over the place. As the day went on and I was getting more tired and exhausted, it wasn't because of the drive. I was just tired and exhausted because the day was a long day. But
sure,
that truck was so comfortable.
And quiet.
It started and quiet, and it did everything well, and I started finding, the ergonomics started working for me, and I was like, and the whole family was comfortable too, and I was like, oh, this thing's great. So that's kind of when it started growing on me. So, you like to did all the crazy off-road sport fun WRX tricks, and it started growing on me when it did the luxury car trick. We were all dressed up and comfortable, and it was quiet, and it was amazing. So,
and that's the hat trick of I know we beat this dead horse, but that's the magic of the four-door truck, is that if you spec it a certain way, it does the business meeting or funeral or the nice, clean clothes, dressed up thing just as well as the trying to be a WRX on a dirt road. Right?
Right.
It can do both, and that's when we really like when we were done filming it. We were both a little bit giddy about it.
Yeah. Well, a little yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. And although during the week we inversely liked it. At one point when I gave it to you, I was like, I don't know if I was just crazy on the first one, but I've got some issues with this one. And then the next day you called me and said, yeah, you are crazy. That thing's great. So we kind of just went back and forth. But at the end of the day, it's still I'm right where I landed on the first truck. If you are looking at interiors being important to you, do not ignore the Fords now, even though the Ram exists and the Ram is as good as it is. You can't bite on that alone. You got to buy it because of something else, or you just prefer one brand or the other, or just the aesthetic. Yeah. They're both such competent places to spend time in, and they just do it all. I love them. They're great.
They really do. Okay, so on the F-150 theme, and I hate to talk about a lot of F-150 and Raptors and Ford stuff all the time, but it's just what's in the news right now, and that's just how it is. So in episode 2, we made some Raptor R predictions.
We did.
And since then, we've got some Raptor news. Not necessarily Raptor R news. So in this next segment, I would like for you to explain kind of what happened with the Raptor announcement, what was actually announced and confirmed, and how did Ram respond, and why did they, well, let's just say straight up own Ford?
Yeah, so let's start with what we do know, okay? So the Raptor Gen 3 has been revealed, which will be coming out later this year. And I hate to break it to the Raptor fanboys out there, myself included, there will not be a V8 initially. The Raptor R is still a concept. There's rumors that it will be a race-only spec with a V8, which is a little bit misleading, which tells me it's not for street use. I highly doubt that's the case. There's such a clamoring for the V8 in the Raptor, even though the EcoBoost, like we've just previously mentioned, is a monster. People want the V8 back. The sound is not the same. In fact, we've got this audio. We've filmed this thing twice now. It sounds like a vacuum cleaner on the outside.
Yes, it does.
It's the biggest Hoover you've ever seen, and it blows by, and you go, "Damn, that's a fast vacuum!" And it's so impressive. And on the inside, it fakes you that it's a V8. It has the augmented sound, which is better than it used to be, but it's still fake. And
it's terrible.
It doesn't have any turbo sounds. Like, man, make it sound like a 2J under there. That's what you need to do. Make that thing just external wastegates, just blowing fire out of the hood. That's what it should be doing from the factory. So, anyways, moral of the story is the Raptor will not be available with a V8 initially, but we are hearing from people like Mike Levine, which is a comms rep from Ford, has confirmed that the V8 is coming. But I'm going to jab a little bit here. The Bronco is coming as well, and we're still waiting for that. So let's just be patient.
Ouch. Okay.
Yeah. So let's just be patient. A lot of great things happening, exciting things happening. And let's be honest, COVID is slowing everything down.
COVID's messing. Oh, yeah, that's a whole other topic. COVID is messing up all the manufacturers right now. Yeah.
Everyone. There's a chip in everything now. And if you don't, it's a problem. So the news, though, that is coming immediately is you can get 37-inch tires on it, which is something that and look, as an owner of a Gen 1 Raptor, you go to any Raptor group, whether it be Facebook-based or forums like it was back in the day. First mod, 37s, bro. Got to have 37s. Right?
And lights.
Lights. As if it doesn't function with 35s. It's like you can't touch a curb with 35s. It just, So Ford's done a great job. They've made that happen. And guess what? Here's the secret of putting 37s on something that came with 35s. Ford didn't design it for 37s.
Right.
So that means that there's some kind of trade-off somewhere, whether it be speedometer or geometry in the front suspension or rubbing fenders or whatever you want to call it. Ford has engineered it to have 37s, which means it won't do that stuff. So that's actually a bigger deal than I think people realize. They didn't just stuff tires on it. They had to go back to the drawing board and make sure it still worked. So that's exciting.
Okay. Before you get into how Ram owned Ford on this news, please share what you and I think the biggest news to be with the Raptor.
Definitely the 5-link rear suspension with paint on bar. So what that means is instead of leaf springs like a donkey cart, it has coil springs like a civilized automobile.
Like a donkey cart. Seriously, why?
Seriously.
When are the other truck manufacturers going to catch up to this?
Well, Ram. Well, hang on. Let's give credit to Ram. They started it first.
Yeah, they did,
and they have mastered it. And they've even done it on the 3/4 tons, as we reviewed previously.
Right. And why is this such a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal because of ride quality. That's the biggest deal.
Yeah.
And also, so the design of a leaf spring is that it just connects front and back on the chassis, and the axle mounts like an intersection across it. And so the way that it mounts it centers the rear axle as it needs to be. It will not shift left and right because the leaf spring itself centers the axle on both sides.
Right.
When you go to a coil spring, it takes some more time and engineering because the coil wants to just fall over. It's not going to center anything. And with a solid axle, that means you have to do things like a 5-link or a 3-link with a panhard bar, or a 5-link with a panhard bar, or a 4-link with a panhard bar, which is where the 5th link is the panhard bar. So what it means is it's an advanced suspension. It's going to ride better. Even in daily use, it will ride better. And when you get out into Baja and you're playing that game, that just means you can go even faster over that village that you were already going fast over.
Right. And the reason it's such big news is all those advantages you talked about. But the reason it's big news that Ford announced this on the Raptor is because
it'll trickle down. Yeah.
It's coming to the rest of the lineup, and that's going to be huge for the F-150. And it's probably like a mid-cycle refresh. I would guess 2023, something like that.
Yeah,
You'll probably start seeing it in the rest of the F-150. So that'll be its refresh announcement, So
because they'll just transfer those mounts over to the standard Ford lineup.
Absolutely, which will be great.
Which is great news because we've driven the current Ram and the current 150. They both ride well, and the Ram rides great. That's the difference.
And it runs. And it's so good that it rides great even in the 3/4 ton. That's how great these make the ride. So a 3/4 ton is not supposed to ride good, but it does with that. So
it's kind of crazy that coil spring technology from, I don't know, the 40s is finally making its way to the truck market. So
finally. And look, I saw a great forum post the other day in an off-road forum talking about, oh, you have to have leaf springs, you can be heavy duty, blah blah blah. Anything big's got to be leaf springs. And then immediately someone started posting pictures of all these huge, heavy military vehicles that have coil spring.
I was just about to go there. The H1 Hummer, what does it run on? Coils.
Yeah, it's just a misnomer. It's just not, it's antiquated. It's not needed. Stop it.
Correct. And guess what? Semis run on airbag springs. They don't run on leaves anyways.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's get on to our we're just going to call this a straight-up old man, get off my lawn rant.
Oh, man. I'm so
and this is because I want to give the background on this, and you can start it off for us. But technology. We're both getting old. Okay, look, that's part of it. That's life.
Sure.
It's happened to all of us.
And by old, you mean we're in our 30s, but mentally we're 50 plus. We know that.
Yeah, true. But what's happened with technology is it's gotten... Well, it's advanced, and that's mostly good, generally speaking.
Is it advanced?
Generally speaking.
Sorry, I'm getting started too soon here.
In everything in life, generally speaking, yes, technology advancing is good. But when it comes to cars, we've had quite the issues with the two cars we had last week, the Elantra and the F-150, which is hilarious because those are all new models. They're not like old models that haven't been updated and the technology is suffering. It's brand new technology in both those cars. It's the latest and greatest that Ford and Hyundai have to offer. And when you and I have the latest Apple and Android phones, they're not old.
They're up to date.
They're up to speed. We had, and that's just one of our issues we had, but we had quite the issues that it were just maddening because when technology doesn't work, it makes you want to kill or punch somebody. It's not good. Not good.
And when you're driving a car at speed, that's even worse because you have tools at your disposal.
Right. So why don't you go ahead and start us off, and I'm sure I'll have plenty to add to it. So go ahead, old man. Get off my lawn.
Can we start with the Elantra? Because at the tail end of these reviews, that's the one that just pissed me off the most. And again, this is not a comment on the car and its engineering competency and what it is.
No.
This is a comment on the stupid Apple CarPlay.
And let's be fair to both of these cars. I'm sure there'll be updates that will fix these.
But I'm sure next week they'll be fixed. And the
but when we had them,
at the time of recording, both the vehicles and our phones were up to date. I can tell you this because I checked on both of them. Because I thought surely something's wrong with my phone or the firmware on the car is up to date. So I updated all of them. And turns out they were already up to date. And by the way, the Ford is so fancy, it has over-the-air updates, which is great. So I checked it and it said, no, dum-dum, there's nothing wrong with this. And then proceeded to jack up my phone calls. So it's, let's start with the Ford first. We'll save the Hyundai for the last. So the Ford, you and I have conversations on the way home from work often to talk about what we're driving that day and get feedback and get our bearings straight. Mm-hmm. And I thought my bearings were straight and that the truck was pretty good. And then after about 3 minutes on the call, there was a 2 to 3 second sound delay from when I said a word and you actually heard it.
Which was maddening because neither one of us could figure out what was going on at first.
Completely infuriating. And I had called you to tell you that the Apple CarPlay audio streaming was skipping like a scratched CD. So that's what started the conversation. And then I'm trying to explain this to you, and you're just there's a delay, and you're going, "What? Huh? What? You there? You there? What? You know
right.
that conversation."
Oh
so,
yeah.
We hang up. We call back. We start over. Maybe there's something wrong with the satellites, right? We'll blame the...
Right. Who knows?
I left my foil hat on too long or something else is going on. No, same thing happened again. And then at one point, we just jokingly hung up on each other. I put my podcast back on, and it skipped like a broken CD from 1998.
Well, and then I think I called you back like a peasant and just held the phone to my ear.
Yeah, and it's weird. That worked. So bizarre. It just worked. And
we had to bypass the entire car system, so...
Right, and so by the time I got home, my wife she saw the blood on my forehead and the vein popping out, and she thought, "Oh my God, what happened? Did you get into a wreck?" And I just said CarPlay, and I walked off. And she knew. She knew it was pretty serious.
Oh, man.
So,
yeah, pretty infuriating.
Maddening. Completely maddening, because I looked down and I went, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't the top trim.
Well, that's funny.
It's $70,000 and it still doesn't freaking work.
Well, let me give you my experience because, we have two different phone systems. We get to test all of it so our viewers can be up to speed, right?
Yeah, that's why we do that.
No matter which camp you're in, we test them all. Generally speaking, Apple CarPlay works easier because there's just more control in the whole thing. And I didn't expect Android Auto to work flawlessly. It's fine. I'm okay with that. So I get in there. Oh, it has wireless Android Auto. It's one of the big things they advertise. I'm like, oh, awesome, because wireless Android Auto is a great idea because why have the wireless charging if you can't do the wireless? It's one of my beefs, so I'm glad they're offering that.
Sure.
So I try to get it to pair up, go through the whole rigmarole, look it all up, go to Ford's manual. Let me back up. Okay, I haven't even told you all this. Okay. I try to connect it normally, like just following all the on-screen prompts. Nothing's working. Okay, you know what? Screw it. I'll actually plug it in like a Neanderthal and use my cable and use it old school. So I plugged it in old school to see because that always works in every car, right? Like you plug it in and that works.
Well, not always. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Why would it not work? So here's what happened with the front plug. I plugged it in and my phone goes into constant reboot mode. Just power up, power down, power up, power down, power up, power down. Like, oh, okay, great. Let me try the other USB plug that's in the center armrest. Plugged it in. Oh, Android Auto acts like it's trying to come up. And then it just doesn't come up. It just starts charging. I'm like, well, okay, at least it's charging and not rebooting. I guess it's progress. So then I decide, it's okay, Brian. I'll actually use the user manual because I've got the Ford app, which is actually pretty cool. And their infotainment's got the user manual in the screen. Save some paper and you can just look it up. It's got the over-the-air stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. Oh, well, couldn't really find anything there. No problem. I'll just Google the Ford manual and see if I can't figure out what's going on here. Well, they've got all kinds of information for you, Brian, with the Sync 3 and the 2020 Ford F-150. Guess how much information they have for you for the Sync 4 2021 F-150? I'm going to go ahead and tell you, absolutely none.
No way.
You've got to be kidding me. So I just decided to use Bluetooth and said, screw it. I guess I don't get to use Android Auto in this truck this week, and that's fine. So that was my experience and made me want to just
jump out of your skin.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. So
well, I will say the saving grace in my experience. And by the way, the reboot scenario sounds horrific.
I was I'm like, there must be something wrong with my phone. So I did the same thing you did. I'm going to make sure it's up to date. Up to date. Okay. I checked over the update on the Ford too. Yeah, you're right. It's up to date. And so then I started Googling Android Auto F-150 connections. Oh, it turns out there's a ton of issues, and I'm not the only one, so it's not just me.
Okay.
Because I thought, well, maybe it's just our scenario. It's not. Now, again, to be fair, like you say, it's probably been fixed this week. I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was quite frustrating, and Ford at that moment didn't have a fix for it. So,
Well, as tragic as that is, I do want to give Ford some credit because when I plugged my phone in, like you said, a Neanderthal, to the cord, it worked as intended. And it quit skipping. The CD quit scratching. So that's the good news.
And to give Ford credit, I'll say this. Being forced to use Bluetooth like a caveman.
Sure.
It made me actually use Ford's system versus just Android's system. And it was actually quite intuitive. I had the navigation. Okay. Everything worked real well. When I was in Bluetooth mode, everything worked the way it should. Even the little voice prompt things worked pretty well and knew what I was trying to say. So that being said, it actually almost made me think, I almost like this better than Android Auto. So I will admit that. So
at least you had a solution, right? That's the good news. And also because of the over-the-air updates, you don't have to go back to the dealer when this thing is ready to get updated. It's just going to do it, and it's going to work. And guess what? It probably is fixed now or will be shortly.
It probably is.
Because certainly if we're not the only ones. Now, can I move to the piece de resistance from Korea?
Yes, because unfortunately that wasn't our only issue that week. So,
and audience, just so you know, we don't have routine issues with this. The previous week we had two loaners that had no problems like that.
None.
None.
And by the way, we've got one this week that has no problems.
No problems at all. So it was just a bizarre time for phones and cars. So the Hyundai. It has something called wireless Apple CarPlay.
Yep.
Do you know what that means? It does not have
wireless Apple CarPlay.
No,
like the Ford.
No. You are correct, but also does not have wired Apple CarPlay. So there is no plug-in bypass, so it doesn't work. And also, it has a wireless charging pad. Do you know what that did more than charge my phone?
I don't know.
It asked for my debit card thinking it was a pay station.
That's right.
I would set my phone down and a Chase bank card would pop up. And I go, what the heck is going on? Am I making a payment on this car? What is happening?
Maybe you had to pay to get it to work. I don't know.
Well, maybe that was a problem. If it was that easy, I would have paid whatever they wanted to make it work because it was so infuriating.
And, oh, by the way, it did work a few times when I was with you when you didn't want it to work.
Yeah, I would pull up next to you at a stoplight. And my Bluetooth that was working on the Ford would all of a sudden be connected to the Hyundai. So do you know what I did? I went and turned my Bluetooth off.
Well,
do you know what kept happening? The same thing. It still kept. In fact, I looked at my screen and it said wireless CarPlay is connected, and I was like, I don't have it even turned on in the truck. It's not even turned on the phone. What the heck is going on?
Okay, at one point, we were trying to film a little walk around, and I was in the car, and I was trying to show something on the infotainment screen. You had completely disconnected your phone.
Yep.
It wasn't even in the car. You had unpaired it, all that crap.
Yep.
And the Apple CarPlay started working. Like,
bizarre.
What is happening?
What is going on? Yeah.
So, okay. Well, here's my experience with the Elantra and wireless Android Auto. Okay. Picked it up from you one night, was driving home. Hey, this got wireless Android Auto. Let's get this set up, pulled over, let's pair it, let's get it all working. It worked. I was like, freaking awesome.
Jackpot.
And then I made a phone call and got off the phone, and it stopped working. I was like, oh, well, that's weird. Okay, let's get it the pair again. Pulled over, got some gas, tried to get it the pair again. No, didn't pair again until right before I turned it back into you, and we swapped again. So it worked for me twice. I will say that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it did work for me twice.
I will say that when it did work for me, the music never skipped, like the CD was messed up, or the phone call never messed up. But every about 3 minutes, an error screen would come up, and it would say, failure to connect to phone, please reconnect. And I sent you a screenshot of this. Now, the good news is it would never quit playing the audio. The audio never stopped. The music never stopped. The phone call never stopped. But the full touchscreen, which had, whatever I had set it to, is now just full of error message. And so I did take it for about an hour trip one day, and I just left it on that screen because it was driving me so batty. Because I would turn it off, and then about 3 minutes later, come back on. It kept functioning, but it also meant that it was charging my bank account apparently, and I couldn't do anything else. Like if I was within 20 meters, it was getting the car. The car was taking over. Like it was happening in the house at one point. I was like, if the car was on, I went inside. I was nowhere near the car, and it was grabbing this thing. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So, anyways, interesting week for tech.
It was, and it's funny. So my next solutions were, well, I'll plug it in. That worked half the time. And then, well, if that doesn't work, I'll use Bluetooth. And that worked half the time. So it was, every time I got in the Elantra, it was, well, let's see how it's going to work this time, or if it does at all.
Well, at least you could plug it in on yours. I plugged it in and it made no difference. It would charge the phone, but it would not CarPlay or it wouldn't even just stream audio outside of CarPlay. It just said, no, we CarPlay.
Here's how frustrating our tech experience was. We both got back in our older vehicles, much older vehicles.
With a sigh of relief.
With, antiquated Bluetooth, and mine doesn't even have a screen, which was so nice.
Yeah.
It just, it's ridiculous because it shouldn't be that simple, but I didn't have to worry about any connection, frustrating, weird issues, and it was nice.
It just worked. And
yeah,
so, on that note, I want to bridge to one last topic before we close this.
Ooh, bonus topic.
And that is tech in general in cars. And I want to we'll talk about this in a future episode. I want to make probably a whole episode about this. But the one thing that over time in the Ford became a little frustrating is that the implementation of tech was just too much. So when you have,
and by you're also in tech, you're including nannies here.
Oh yeah, that's where I'm going. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's always been a pet peeve of mine. That's not Ford specific. That's just stability control specific and lane keep assistance and radar cruise and all these things that are coming in, right? So, but in general, just in tech, the interface of the Ford, while it was a good visual design, I do like the visual design. The digital cluster in the middle has so much going on and so little configurability.
Mm-hmm.
And then the screen on the right is 12-inch, which is the equivalent of like an 80-inch TV in your living room. Like it's huge. And while it's very beautiful, it is very distracting. And
very.
So I would try to use lane keep assist because I'm too distracted by the screens. Like the phone is not the risk anymore. The phone is much safer
you have to have
anymore.
lane keep assist just to try to figure out all the tech in these cars.
You're right. But the problem with that is on certain roads, it looks like you're driving drunk because it's just pinging off of things. It's bouncing off this lane, it's losing that stripe there, it's jumping this ditch over here. Luckily it's WRX, it's fine. But, that gets back to my point that...
Oh, hang on, wait. I'm glad you mentioned lane keep assist bouncing around because every time I pick these cars up from you and I drive home on the highway between our houses, there's these crossover lanes in between this divided highway.
Yeah, the medians, yeah.
In the medians. And there's a turning lane to get into those crossovers.
And it drives in those, doesn't it?
It keeps trying to drive in those every single time.
And they all do it. The Hyundais, the Kias, the Fords, they all do it.
Yeah, they all do it. Yeah.
And so I find myself, because we're testing these cars, we're going to be thorough, and I don't like driving aid like that. I don't even like traction control, okay? Or ABS is kind of where I'll accept that and be happy. But
Barely.
I try them all. And after about a day or two of just really trying to get on board, I turn them off, and I still turn off traction and stability control. I wait and turn that crap off every time, and I drive to work. Because you know what? Driving is just best left to people. I'm sorry. And we'll talk about this in depth later on, but the self-driving car does not exist yet. It's getting closer. It's getting better, but they all use different languages. They don't talk to each other. It's just let me do it for now. Let's give it some more time. It'll get there. I'm excited for it to get there for the commuter, but...
And I'm with you. Technology is advancing. It's coming. At some point, maybe it'll actually know what it's doing and actually will drive itself.
Yes.
And when that happens, great. We can enjoy a nice 6-pack of some IPA and cool. But until then, let's go what Dodge tried to do with the Charger ad years ago. Leaders of the human resistance.
Yes,
thank you, please. Let us drive the freaking cars.
Yeah, and don't make it be a workout. In fact, I'm okay with the tech being there for those that want it, but I legitimately feel like they're a distraction and are breeding worse drivers.
I need an override button.
Yeah, I need a red button that just says off, and we're good to go. And by the way, the vehicle you're driving right now, which we'll talk about in the next podcast, is basically that out of the box, which is really refreshing.
Ooh, it's nice. It's an older school vehicle, but it lets you do stuff. Yeah, it's kind of nice, refreshing. We needed this one this week, so.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, well, another good podcast. Thanks to everyone that listened. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to doing another one soon. Brian, what else we got? Swag?
We've got
Merch?
swag. Yeah, we've got go to our breakcheckshow.com. We've got merch there. And if you
Oh,
didn't
we're also
know,
on TikTok. How about TikTok?
oh, we've got TikTok going too. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awkward for adults, but hey, it's there. So
So perfect thing to talk about right after an old man rant.
that's true.
TikTok.
We're actually having a lot of fun with it because it's short and sweet. We can be stupid with it, and which we try to do in our YouTube reviews. If you're listening and don't know, by the way, we have a show on YouTube, so
Yeah.
check that out too. And thanks for watching. We do this every week. We'll talk to you next week.
You did it again. Thanks for watching.
Son of a gun.
Do you know how audio works? It's audio, not visual.
Oh, okay. Well, look, we do try to do awkward endings and everything that we do, and I think we're succeeding.
Well, you've done it again. I guess we've got another awkward ending. So,
You're welcome.
so I guess in a weird way, you've nailed it.
As always.
All right, see ya.
Bye.